Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Hersheypark in Hershey, Pennsylvania is one of the most popular amusement parks in the United States. And for many, it is also considered one of the best. I went in 2022, and my experience was not great. I found some rides underwhelming, and in general, I did not have the best time compared to a good amount of other parks I visited that year, and in years prior and after. However, I just went back to the park, and I will say, it probably is one of the best parks in the US. So in this video, I'll be going through my full experience, talking about the individual rides, and the individual aspects of the park, helping you figure out what's good, what's bad, what could be improved, and generally what should you know when you go to the park. So is it worth going to? Is it really one of the best in the US? Is it the very best? Let's find out. So first of all, my trip was on a Sunday in July. Previously, in 2022, I had gone in late June on a Wednesday. And maybe I had bad luck, but the crowds were 3 times as bad on that Wednesday in 2022. So this time, they were not as bad and I was able to get on stuff much more efficiently. Generally, I would avoid Saturdays if you can because of crowds being the biggest on that day, but it really can vary and it's impossible to know for sure. I'm not entirely certain if I got bad luck on my last visit or good luck on my most recent visit, but maybe a local would be able to figure that out for me. So in terms of the actual experience, driving up to the park is fun because you can see some of the biggest rides from the road, including Skyrush, Candymonium, and Wildcat's Revenge. Once you're on the actual property, you have to drive around a pretty large loop because the parking lot is massive. Hersheypark is a full resort. You have a lot more than just the one theme park. There's the chocolate world, there's a sports complex, and much, much more. So it does make sense they'd have that, and that means you'll want to plan to get there a bit early. Definitely generally try to get to any park before opening, but this one will take a little longer for you to get ready because there is a pretty big drive to get around to the parking. And the walk to the actual park, in my opinion, is not too bad, but it still is a bit of a hike from the parking lot. Now for the actual park experience. The first ride my party and I went to was Wildcat's Revenge. And you can see more about my thoughts on that ride in a ranking of all the roller coasters, but to summarize, this is one of my favorite roller coasters in the world. It's utterly fantastic. If you enjoy high-speed thrills, this is the ride for you. You get thrown out of your seat, crazy intensity throughout, some of the best inversions on any roller coaster, and just in general, a super fun experience that never loses its speed, and the whole way through it seems to get better as it goes on. Similar rides by the same manufacturer like Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa peak pretty early on in the ride. This one gets better as it goes on, and it is without a doubt a top 10 roller coaster I've ever been on, which is a very, very impressive bar. The next roller coaster we went on was Laff Trakk. Laff Trakk is an indoor family spinning coaster, and this one definitely gets a long line. So I'd say it should be one of the first you hit if you're short on time or they're on a crowded day or something like that. For me, it's not the best roller coaster, and if you're not going to try to get on every credit, I would say you can probably skip Laff Trakk. It's just kind of okay. It does not spin as much as most spinning coasters, and the theming inside is a little underwhelming because it can't really hide the fact you're in a dark warehouse. Other than that, it's okay, but definitely not a must-do attraction at the park. Following this, we rode Lightning Racer. Lightning Racer is an upper tier ride at the park for me. I think it's a very fun GCI wooden coaster, made more fun by the fact that it races. So you can ride with your party, or you can ride in a separate car, and you'll be racing alongside each other, passing by. One of you will win and get the satisfaction of winning a race. It's definitely fun. And the ride itself provides decent thrills for a wooden coaster. While not nearly as insane as Wildcat's Revenge, it's still quite a good ride. And following this, we head away from this area of the park. These rides are all in the very far back left, so you will have to walk a pretty great distance if you want to get on them, but I think it's worth it. The next ride we did come to was Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit had the most consistently long wait throughout the day. I would say if you are not there on a pretty quiet day like I was, you should probably do this first, because the line builds up right away. It was a half hour pretty much the whole day I was there, and while that may not seem super long, it was definitely getting longer at different times throughout the day, but never lower than a half hour. Whereas pretty much every other ride, even Candymonium, was only a 15-minute wait at certain points. So this is a good one to hit first, especially since it is one of the best in the park. It's very unique. It feels like a Gerstlauer roller coaster, something like Daredevil Dive at Six Flags Over Georgia, but it's made by Amusement. It is a great instrument for sure. The first drop and the airtime hill provide a lot of fun forces, and while the inversions are not the best of any roller coaster out there, it's still a unique layout and a very fun, well-paced one. Definitely one of the best roller coasters in the park, and a must. The next ride we ended up going on, we weren't planning to do, but it looked fun, so we did it, and it was Howler. Howler is a fun little flat ride. I enjoyed it quite a lot, honestly. You get to spin the car around to your heart's desire, and you do get quite dizzy at the end of it. I think it's a very well-made flat ride, it looks nice from off-ride, and it's a very fun one because you get some control for yourself, and it's also decently intense. So if you have to do one flat ride in the park in terms of the thrilling ones, this might honestly be my pick. The next roller coaster we came to was Storm Runner. It's right next to Jolly Rancher Remix, which we did right after. And Storm Runner is definitely the better of the two rides for me. Storm Runner is an interesting one because it's an intimate accelerator, something like Top Thrill Dragster originally was at Cedar Point, but it's not nearly as tall or fast. And while I do think it's not as good as Top Thrill Dragster, it makes up for the statistic deficit by having a full layout. After the top hat, you have multiple inversions and airtime moments, and that's super fun. The flying snake dive is an utterly insane moment, and the whole roller coaster is just a blast. It's even better than Fahrenheit for me, and it actually had a very low line later in the day, so I wouldn't say you have to get on it right away. I never had to wait long for this one, and it was very interesting to me given how good it is. It might be due to the fact that it's kind of tucked away from other rides, but overall, it's definitely a priority, but not one you have to rush to get on. So right across the way, you have Jolly Rancher Remix, a Vekoma boomerang, and these rides can be pretty janky, but this one is improved upon other ones due to better restraints and overall being smoother. Another fun little detail is they sort of theme this ride up. You have a tunnel you go through, and it sprays some smell-o-vision type thing that's supposed to smell like a Jolly Rancher. Personally, I smelled nothing, but the whole theme is still pretty nice to have, and while not mind-blowing, adds a little bit to one of the best boomerang coasters I've personally been on. The next ride we ended up going to was Triple Tower, and I will say, this one should not be a priority. It's a very lackluster drop tower, and while there is charm to the fact there's 3 different towers of different heights, meaning you can intentionally not go on the tallest one because it's not even really better than the middle one, and you'll save some time. However, it's just not thrilling, and while the views are good, there are better drop tower views out there, and there are better rides in the park that offer better views, so I would say this one is worth skipping. And on this note, I should mention the layout of the park, because it does have flaws, and some hate it. And as I was walking over to the area with Comet and Skyrush, that was where I most noticed the issues. However, I personally think it is not that bad. There are plenty of dead ends, things like Laff Track being way over on the side, and Storm Runner and the Jolly Rancher being tucked in their own area, and then Great Bear being way over in the back right corner. It can be a little tough. And it's not a small park at all. You have to take a pretty big walk to get over to Wildcat's Revenge from the front entrance. However, I don't really mind. I never got lost when I was trying to get to a certain place, and that's a big plus, because when it's hard to find where you're trying to go, that's a bigger issue for me. I never had an issue finding my place. And while there is backtracking, the park looks nice overall, so I never felt upset when I had to walk a little extra. It's a bit overhated as a layout, and the way the rides look in certain areas is definitely commendable. most notably in the Hollow. The Hollow contains Comet, Skyrush, Sooperdooperlooper, and technically Great Bear. You have these 4 roller coasters intermingling with each other, and they all look great. I love watching Great Bear go over the path, or Comet along the side, Sooperdooperlooper on this sort of ridge, and so much more to enjoy. Skyrush is honestly the hardest one to get footage of because while you can see the great first drop, afterwards it's all over a pond, and it's a little harder to get good views of that. However, it still looks great. So now to discuss the Hollow roller coasters. First we did was Comet. Comet also gets a shockingly long line. For me, it was the weakest of the major thrill coasters. It's fun, but very tame, primarily due to its classic status. It's a very old roller coaster, and they did give it more uncomfortable restraints recently, but overall, it doesn't provide a ton in the wake of modern thrills, and while the views are pretty nice, and it's a nice long, slow ride, if you're going for the big thrills, this one should not be a huge priority. It's good for what it is, but not one of my favorites, and definitely not quite worth a 45-minute wait in my opinion. Next is Skyrush. Skyrush you kinda have to get on once. It's one of the most divisive roller coasters out there. And to put my thoughts bluntly, the restraints are fine now, but this ride is just not that intense. It has good forces, a fine sense of speed, decent pacing despite the short length, and there's 1 or 2 good airtime moments, but nothing on it is really that crazy to me. While you have some good airtime and good speed, that can be said about pretty much every other major ride in the park. You can say that about Fahrenheit, Storm Runner, even Lightning Racer. So while it's a good ride, I don't think it's a great one. That said, the line's not usually that long for it, and you kinda do have to get on it once just to see if you're on the hater side or the fanboy side. There is no in between. Even if I think it's great, I'll still call myself a Skyrush hater because it's kinda fun to do that. Next ride was Sooperdooperlooper. Sooperdooperlooper is a Schwarzkopf roller coaster, and this one is similar to New Revolution at Six Flags Magic Mountain. You have 1 loop, and then a somewhat meandering but decently thrilling layout. The layout is marginally weaker than Comet's probably, but it's a very tough call. I think the main thing that holds it up though is the intensity. It is more consistently intense than Comet, and the loop itself is a very fun moment. It's not one of the best rides in the park, but it's also one that doesn't get a super big line, so I would say it is worth trying to get on. And the last roller coaster in this area is Great Bear. The first thing to note is that Great Bear had the biggest layout issue for me, because it is much higher up than the rest of the rides, so you do have to climb a pretty steep grade in order to get up there. And the most convenient path was closed when I went. So it was a little tough, but still not bad. For the ride itself, Great Bear is not the best B&M inverts. These inverted coasters are all over the world. Many of you may be familiar with Batman the Ride clones at Six Flags parks, or Montu, or Banshee, or Alpengeist, etc. Great Bear is among the worst of these. It's still great though. You have a very unique first drop, a great vertical loop, an Immelman inversion, a nice setting for the second half, and overall a fun, intense experience. It is lacking in interesting elements overall, and I think most inverts provide a better pace or better elements, but it is still probably a top 6 roller coaster in the park, and while the lines can get long, capacity on this one is pretty good, so it moves much faster than others. Therefore, I would recommend trying to get on this one. Following Great Bear, we'd been on most roller coasters we wanted to get on, so we decided to go to Zoo America. Zoo America is a zoo on the opposite side of the road, but you can access it through the park, and it comes with admission. That is a nice little thing to have. I appreciate that it's a little extra thing added to the park. That said, it's not the best zoo out there. It's primarily themed to the animals of the North American continent, and I do enjoy some of the exhibits. That said, I would say half of the exhibits were empty when I went, and the animals have been taken out or similar, and there's a weird army of vultures all over it, so the place feels a little run down. It's nice for a quick, somewhat shady walk, with a few fun views of the monorail going overhead and similar. That said, it's sort of hit or miss whether or not you should spend a lot of time there. I think it's good for a quick relief from the heat, but otherwise, there's not a whole lot of reason to prioritize it. The next ride we ended up doing was Reese's Cup Fusion. And I must say, this ride, despite getting a super long line, is the most skippable ride in the park. I highly recommend you do not do it. It is a shooting dark ride, and I am one of the biggest shooting dark ride fans I know. I love those rides. This is one of the absolute worst. Despite being screen-based, and not having a whole lot of practical targets to worry about, it just doesn't work. Half the targets did not work for me, shooting was a weird hassle, and the audio cues are all over the place. It is not a super fun shooting dark ride, frustrating if you're actually trying to win, underwhelming if you like decent sets. It's just the screens and then a few cardboard cutouts. And frankly, I like the cardboard cutouts better than the screens, but not by a huge margin. So despite this thing always having an hour-long wait, I'd say it's not worth it. Save your time and do something else. Like candymonium. We went to the front of the park for candymonium after this one, and this is without a doubt one of my favorite roller coasters in the park. Before I went back on this trip, it was my favorite of the 2022 visit, and it was even better this time around. I think B&M Hypers are just one of the best roller coaster models out there. They're somewhat gentle and floaty, but still provide a great open car that allows the wind to be in your face, making the ride feel much faster. And on top of that, you have wonderful airtime, that sort of feeling where you're thrown out of your seat. I love that. It's an absolute blast of a ride, and while it's not technically one of the best roller coasters in the world for me, it's definitely a very solid number 2 for the park. Candymonium is without a doubt excellent, but there is another ride we ended up getting on that was a very big surprise for me, and that was the monorail. I was not planning to do the monorail, but we ended up going on it, and it was my favorite non-roller coaster in the park. It's an absolute blast. It takes you on a tour above the park, and that's a nice start. What I wasn't quite expecting was the fact that you get a full view of the original chocolate factory and a good portion of Hershey, Pennsylvania. The fact that monorail sort of takes you outside of the park is very unique, and the fact that cars are so open only makes it feel more like you're really on an adventure. An adventure going outside of Hersheypark, enjoying the full resort area, going over the zoo, over multiple roller coasters. It was so much fun. I highly recommend getting a ride on this if you have time. The other very fun observation type ride was the Kissing Tower. I find it a bit of a weird theme to have in the modern day, but maybe some people still do kiss in the Kissing Tower, what do I know? In terms of views, you get to see pretty much every roller coaster, and they all look great from above. I saw very few actually running while I was up there, but it was still a great view of that, and the Hershey Chocolate Factory, and Zoo America, and much more. My biggest issue is the windows did not seem to be very clean, but maybe that's because I rode pretty late in the day. So after this, we got on every roller coaster and every major ride we wanted to, so we did some extra rides in Storm Runner Wildcats Revenge, and this leads into one final major note I have about the general park quality, and that is the operations. One of the most important things in a park is keeping it running well, making sure the lines are moving for stuff, making sure everything is going as it should so the lines don't build up and make everybody's day miserable. Wildcats Revenge had one of the best teams I've ever seen. They were sending the cars out like crazy, making sure everybody was secure when it went out. One kid got his hand stuck in the gate and they immediately opened it right away. I thought it was fantastic. These people running the Wildcats Revenge crew are among the best of any theme park I've ever seen. And I don't know if they rotate employees, so I got lucky with who was there, but I will say, most of the other rides had pretty bad operations. It was very surprising to me how long it took them to cycle trains on, especially Skyrush. Skyrush was probably the biggest issue. And I know some things have capacity issues at the park, but ultimately, Wildcats Revenge was only the really good operations. None of the others really had it, And that was okay because it was a fairly low crowd day. Maybe that's why they weren't running it super fast, because you didn't really have to worry about lines as much. But unfortunately, if that happens on crowded days, you might have a pretty bad experience. Props to Wildcats Revenge though, you guys did a great job. And there are a few other aspects I should touch on, the first being the water park. This water park is known as the Boardwalk, and it's also included with ticket price. I went on the water coaster Breaker's Edge, and that was the longest line I saw that day. Consistently 2 hours. The water coaster is very fun, and it's definitely the best thing to do in the water park, so I'd say it's probably worth trying to get a ride on if you have multiple days and want to do the water park, and certain situations like that. That said, there is definitely a general capacity issue with the water park, as there tends to be with water parks in general. They're just not quite as built because you can't fit 32 people on a water slide at once. And I noticed the lazy river line being massive, to the point where you can use your fast track on the lazy river. I've never heard of that anywhere else. So while I'm very happy it's included with the dry park, as someone who's not super big on water parks, I wouldn't spend a ton of time here personally, but if you want to, it might be good to have 2 days at the park. One other note to say, the food is mostly eh. I did get a king-size shake, and similar to Reese's Cup Fusion, I highly advise against it. It doesn't taste that good, it's undoubtedly a lot of calories, and it's one of the more expensive options out there. So I would say, get anything else. Generally eat outside of the park, frankly. It's just that it looks so nice with the novelty of it being a massive shake with a bunch of stuff in it, but it's really not worth it. Another note is the merch selection. I'm not big on merchandise, but just walking through the main store at the front of the park, I can confidently say Hersheypark has some of the worst merchandise of any park I've been to. They primarily sell Hershey, really focused on the Hershey part rather than the park. I was able to find very few things based on the actual rides, and there was nothing of interest to me. So if you're there to get a ton of candy, I think you'll love the merch. But for me personally, it really was not a great theme park merchandise selection. And that's all for the actual park, Hersheypark. But right next door is Hershey's Chocolate World. And I do advise going here. Not necessarily for all the upcharge stuff, but the free dark ride known as Hershey's Chocolate Tour. The Chocolate Tour is an awesome dark ride. It is a banger song about how the milk that the cows make produces chocolate all over the world or something like that. It sounds great. It's definitely one of my favorite scenes on the ride, and it provides a decent educational tour about how Hershey's chocolate is made, and sort of reinforces the fact that Hershey is the most overhated chocolate bar in my opinion. I love Hershey's, honestly. And the screen usage is actually pretty decent. I think they could have cut it down at a few places, but overall, it did enhance the scenes. There were some weird audio cues that were a little off, where some scenes started too early or too late, but still, it's good. It's much better than Cup Fusion, so if you have to do one dark ride, definitely this one. There was an insane amount of people in line, but I still got on twice as fast and had more than twice as much fun. So overall, Hersheypark is a great park. It has an amazing roller coaster lineup with some of the best on Earth. You have plenty of great non-coasters like the monorail, Kissing Tower, and extra things like Zoo America and the Boardwalk. The park looks beautiful, has a lively atmosphere, and there's so much to do. That said, it also feels kinda quaint. It doesn't feel overly corporate, even with the big Hershey gift shop and all. It feels like a regional park, and I always love that feeling. The fact that you have the dry park, water park, and zoo in one ticket price means even with operation issues, I think it's among the best value of any major US park in this day and age. In an age where Six Flags is struggling, and some Cedar Fair parks are struggling, and Disney, I don't even know what's going on with them, Hersheypark has generally stayed pretty strong. I imagine the value is different if you do a full resort stay and all, but that's personally not how I do theme parks. Overall, I can't comment on too much, but do what floats your boat. Hersheypark is super fun, and in my opinion, one of the best amusement parks in the United States. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your thoughts on Hersheypark or any questions you have. Like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more content. I'll see you next time.